Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts, and step beyond the screen. Rachel wastes no time digging into Salazar's finances. What she finds is amazing. His empire is buried under hundreds of fake names, shell companies, proxies, and corporate fronts, fighting that through normal legal channels could drag on for years. So she splits her attack in two. Her regular legal team handles the paperwork side, lawsuits, filings, corporate records. For the messier work, she brings in two specialist crews. Bronco runs the first, which handles sabotage, intimidation, disruption, and extraction. Sid runs the second, working through bribery, surveillance, dirty contacts, and compromised officials. The next day, Rachel and Bronco pay a visit to Salazar's lawyer, Horvitz, posing as prospective clients. The meeting is friendly enough until Rachel drops Salazar's name. Horvitz tenses up instantly and calls for security. When a guard steps in, Bronco makes it plain that trying to remove them would be a bad idea, and that's enough to freeze the guard in place and keep Horvitz seated. Rachel tells him she now represents Goldstein and is here to collect on Salazar's debt, demanding a full list of his hidden companies, every shell and proxy tied to him. Horvitz refuses and tells them to leave. Rachel isn't surprised. Not long after, Bronco and Baker fly to an island where Salazar runs part of his business and set up a temporary base there. Meanwhile, Sid turns his attention to one of Salazar's hotel developments in Saudi Arabia, quietly tipping off authorities that the construction far exceeds what was approved. Inspectors shut the site down, and the stalled project starts bleeding roughly $4 million a week. Horvitz doesn't need long to suspect Rachel is behind it. Sid isn't done. He deliberately rear-ends the site superintendent's car, staging it to look like an accident, then plays the shaken bystander while his partner Gucci shows up posing as a doctor. Gucci examines the injured man and declares he needs 6 weeks off work. Then, to make the point stick, tosses a stack of cash into his car. The superintendent counts it, takes the deal, and agrees to back their story and stay clear of the project. More trouble follows for Horvitz. A shipment of structural steel meant for the site gets seized because the paperwork doesn't match the cargo. Between the delays, fines, and logistics mess, Salazar's weekly losses climb from around $4 million to nearly $5 million. Elsewhere, Bronco and Baker go after another piece of Salazar's empire, sneaking onto one of his oil rigs disguised as workers. Baker wants to just blow up the next delivery, but Bronco prefers something quieter. A big explosion draws too much attention. Instead, they plant a small device inside a valve, engineered to look like an ordinary mechanical failure. Safety inspectors get an anonymous tip about the malfunction and keep the rig shut down, costing Salazar about $500,000 for every day it sits idle. With losses piling up everywhere, Salazar finally demands answers from Horvitz, who gives him the obvious one: Rachel. Salazar wants her dead, but Horvitz warns him that killing her solves nothing. She's already arranged for 20 prepaid lawyers to keep the operation running without her. Taking her out wouldn't stop the campaign, it would just remove the one person still willing to negotiate. By Horvitz's estimate, the combined damage from the hotel project, the legal pressure, the seized shipments, and the rig shutdown is already costing Salazar close to $28 million a month, and he urges Salazar to settle before things get worse. His one comfort is thinking Rachel hasn't yet found the most valuable, best hidden parts of Salazar's financial network. He's wrong. Unbeknownst to Horvitz, Bronco planted a bug in his office during that first visit, and Rachel's been listening in ever since. One name surfaces again and again: Wolfgang. Officially, he's just Salazar's accountant. In reality, he's the one moving and hiding the fortune. threading it through layer after layer of shell companies to keep it untraceable. Rachel realizes he could be the key to unlocking the whole network. Her opening comes when Wolfgang throws a private party in Jeddah. Sid slips in posing as a wealthy investor and ends up at a backgammon table, winning again and again, not through luck, but with loaded dice. What really gets Wolfgang's attention, though, is that Sid keeps refusing to collect his winnings. After watching this happen a few times, Wolfgang grows suspicious and challenges him directly. Sid wins that match too, then proposes one more round for just $10 and this time deliberately loses. Claiming he's not carrying cash, he promises to settle up later. Soon after, a package arrives at Wolfgang's office, an ornamental statue that fits right in with the rest of his collection. It's not just a gift. Wolfgang's network sits behind a firewall tough enough to make remote hacking nearly impossible, so Rachel's hacker, Clover, needs a device physically inside the building and that's exactly what's hidden in the statue. Once it's in place, Clover breaks into the network, and within days Rachel has gathered enough evidence to get a judge to issue international orders against Salazar's assets. Horowitz calls with an offer, $300 million to make it all go away. Rachel turns it down flat and tells him that if Salazar wants a deal, he needs to talk to her directly. Anticipating that the meeting will happen on Salazar's island, Rachel sends Sid, Bronco, and the rest of the team ahead of her not to sabotage anything this time, but to build an escape plan in case the negotiation goes badly. Bronco stocks up on an ambulance, a police car, several getaway vehicles, and a stockpile of weapons, and sets up their safe house in a remote spot near 3 possible extraction points and a network of old tunnels that could double as escape routes. Since no one knows whether Salazar will want to meet at his hotel or his private villa, they prepare for both. A regular helicopter is out. Salazar keeps a close eye on the island's airspace and would spot it immediately, so they bring in gyrocopters instead, smaller and far less conspicuous. First they test an escape route through the city by car, but heavy traffic nearly strands them, proving cars are too risky. Motorcycles work better, cutting through traffic easily, though the aggressive riding draws police attention. Rather than pull over, the team treats the resulting chase as a live drill, weaving through gaps and tight turns until they reach a storm drain the police cars can follow into, popping out at the eastern extraction point. Testing the gyrocopters reveals another problem: they take too long to prep for takeoff. Bronco and Sid drill the crew until every aircraft can be airborne within 3 minutes. Checking the western route near Salazar's villa, they find a tunnel that offers good cover but exits near a ravine with no quick way across. Going around would eat up too much time, so Bronco has a zipline rigged over the gap, with ATVs stashed on the far side for a seamless continuation of the escape. Over the following days, the team runs every route repeatedly, timing each turn, tunnel, vehicle swap, and extraction point, ironing out anything that could slow them down. Combat drills are just as intense, shooting on the move, firing from motorcycles, hitting moving targets, because if the escape turns into a firefight, nobody can afford to stop. They also lay traps for pursuers, mines buried along several roads, plus a rig nicknamed the Banana Pie, a solid-looking ground that collapses into a hidden pit under a vehicle's weight. With the outdoor routes locked down, Sid and Bronco turn to Salazar's hotel, entering disguised as tourists. Inside, Bronco fakes a heart attack, and while the manager rushes to help, he lifts her master key. Sid tells the staff it's just low blood sugar, nothing serious, while Gucci quietly kills the hotel's camera feed. With the cameras down, the two men use the stolen key to slip into the penthouse and plant hidden microphones throughout, so any private meeting Salazar holds there will be overheard. They also fit local police cars with hidden devices that can disable the engines remotely, in case officers try to join a chase during Rachel's eventual escape. There's one more location Bronco wants intel on: the prison. He doesn't want to attempt a rescue blind, so Sid gets himself arrested on purpose, dousing himself in alcohol, making a scene in the street, and finishing with public indecency for good measure. The police haul him in exactly as planned. Once inside, Sid maps everything: camera placements, guard counts, weapon types, how the security system functions. After his release, he reports back to Bronco that the prison's tech is badly outdated. He even demonstrates by intercepting one of its wireless signals and using his phone to remotely pop the outer gate. The team folds a prison break plan into their backup options. During all this, Sid clocks that they're being watched. Olsen, Salazar's security chief, tailing them from a distance. Neither side makes a move, they just trade insulting gestures. There's no more pretending at this point. Both sides know exactly who they're up against. With the island contingency squared away, Rachel goes back to court, using the financial evidence her team has gathered to request permission to seize assets Salazar holds directly. The judge grants it, and authorities move fast. Impounding his private jet under international law and seizing his yacht under maritime jurisdiction. Furious, Salazar tells Horowitz he's done negotiating through lawyers. He wants to meet Rachel face to face. She travels to the island, where Sid picks her up and hands her a watch rigged with an emergency button. Press it, and the team gets her exact location instantly. On the drive, Rachel reflects on why Sid and Bronco have stuck with her so long. Years earlier, on one of their first jobs together, both men were thrown in prison in Chiang Mai, and Rachel got them out. They've been loyal ever since. Sid notices a car tailing them but decides not to react. At the hotel, Salazar and his men discuss the coming meeting, and the microphones planted earlier let Gucci eavesdrop from base A until the signal starts breaking up right when it matters. Rachel arrives with Bronco and Sid as her security and sits down across from Salazar. After everything she's done to his businesses, he finally names a number: $350 million. She refuses. He goes to $400 million. Still number. Rachel makes it clear the debt is $1 billion, and she intends to collect every cent. Salazar loses his patience and ends the meeting. Back in the car, Rachel tells Clover to keep digging through Salazar's finances. She wants something with real teeth. Still stewing over the failed talks, she has Sid and Bronco stop for a beer instead of heading straight to the safe house. They pick a small cafe. Copyright, and at first nothing seems off. Then Gucci spots several vehicles converging on the drone feed. Men closing in from multiple directions. To enter and take a table near the back. Bronco recognizes them from Salazar's hotel. Two more head for the bar while others wait outside. It's clear Rachel has been surrounded. Bronco casually drapes a towel over his lap to hide his drawn handgun. Sid arms himself and moves toward the rear. More men gather outside. The waiter takes one look at the room and bolts, and Bronco opens fire, dropping the two men at the back before they can react. The rest of the team moves in unison. Sid takes out an attacker in the kitchen. Baker handles one near the bar, and within seconds the cafe. Copyright is a war zone. Gucci, watching remotely, confirms the rear exit is clear, and Bronco hustles Rachel out while the others hold off the gunmen near the vehicles, cutting through them before they can regroup. When two more attackers approach on a scooter, Gucci's warning lets Bronco drop them both before they arrive. The whole thing is over in minutes. Badly outnumbered, Rachel's team walks away without a scratch, splitting into separate cars and clearing the area before reinforcements show up. Olsen reports the failed hit to Salazar, and when Horowitz finds out what Salazar tried, he's livid. Attempting to kill Rachel in the middle of an active billion-dollar dispute could hand her exactly the legal opening she needs, potentially letting her expose not just Salazar's legitimate businesses but everything he's kept hidden. Salazar, realizing how badly this could backfire, calls Wolfgang too late. Clover already has urgent news for Rachel. Money is on the move across Salazar's network as he scrambles to hide assets. Rachel sees her opening. Every transfer leaves a trail and tells Clover to trace it all, tying each secret company back to Salazar so they can be identified and frozen. While Rachel holds up at the safe house, her legal team goes back to court and secures international orders freezing Salazar's holdings. The impact is immediate. Companies shut down one after another, accounts get locked, assets get seized, and his empire starts crumbling. Salazar's people, realizing Rachel has information she shouldn't have, tear apart Wolfgang's office and finally find the transmitter hidden in the statue Sid sent, but by then it's far too late. Rachel already has most of his key companies mapped and linked to him. Salazar invites her back for another round, this time offering $800 million. She refuses again, still holding out for the full billion, then plays her final card. If he won't pay, she'll hand everything she's found to the investors and partners he's cheated over the years, people who could come after him for close to $5 billion. Realizing the fight could cost far more than her original claim, Salazar caves, orders Harvitz to arrange full payment, and fires him on the spot. Rachel leaves the hotel, calls Bobby, and confirms the deal is done. 3 months pass, and Rachel still hasn't been paid. Holed up at an isolated desert compound, she can't reach Bobby by phone. Then she spots a vehicle approaching in the distance and calls for her security guard, and no answer. Her assistant hasn't seen him either. Stepping outside to check, Rachel finds the guard dead in the sand, then rushes back to find her assistant killed too. The vehicle arrives, and Olsen steps out. Rachel understands instantly. Salazar hasn't forgotten her. Before Olsen can stop her, she triggers the emergency button on her watch, activating the tracker. Then he takes her. That evening, Bronco and Sid confront Bobby in her office, telling her Rachel's been kidnapped. Bobby insists the authorities at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Spanish law enforcement, are already on it, but Bronco and Sid have no faith in that response to them. She's hiding behind bureaucracy while Rachel's life is on the line. They remind her of the rule Rachel's lived by through this entire ordeal: a debt is a debt, and Bobby still owes her. Meanwhile, Rachel is locked up in a prison under Salazar's control. He visits her personally. His assets are still frozen, and he's furious Goldstein hasn't undone the damage despite their deal, so he's created his own leverage, her. He's betting that threatening her life will force Goldstein's hand. Rachel points out the flaw in that plan. Goldstein hasn't even paid her in 3 months, so clearly they don't value her enough to bother. Salazar isn't moved. He gives her an ultimatum: convince Goldstein to honor the deal, or die. Bronco, Sid, and the rest of the team head back to the island, where everything from the earlier operation is still in place: a safe house intact, vehicles hidden, traps still set. Only this time, they're not preparing for a hypothetical, they're breaking Rachel out. The team splits up. Bronco and Sid, in stolen police uniforms and their acquired patrol car, drive straight to the station holding Rachel and walk in without raising suspicion. They head for the weapons room, overpower and cuff an officer who gets too close, and grab firearms before moving on the cells. Taking down the handful of guards there, some disarmed, some beaten, all locked up. They hand Rachel the keys. She frees herself but stays out of sight while Bronco and Sid push toward the main office, weapons raised, ordering everyone to surrender. The officers comply until 5 more walk in through the front and go for their guns instead. A close-range shootout breaks out, with Bronco and Sid clearing the room, but outside, more patrol cars converge and surround the building, trapping the 3 of them inside. That's when Baker blows a hole in the rear wall from outside, and Rachel, Bronco, and Sid dash through the smoke to rejoin the rest of the team. They pile into a getaway car with police in immediate pursuit, tearing through the same countryside route they drilled endlessly. Bullets chew up the car's bodywork until Sid, knowing they can't take much more, detonates the buried mines. A string of blasts wrecks the pursuing convoy across the road, but the police still have a drone in the air, tracking them from above. They reach the extraction point just as the gyrocopters are prepped and ready, and for a moment, it looks like a clean escape. Then the drone drops an explosive on the hangar, destroying the aircraft and killing one of the team. Their main escape plan is gone. Before they can regroup, another hostile vehicle rushes them. Rachel ducks low, covering her ears, while Bronco and the others fight back, dropping most of the attackers almost instantly. Sid finishes it by shooting a nearby fuel tank, the explosion taking out the last gunman in their vehicle. With a brief window to move, the team splits between the damaged car and 2 motorcycles. 3 more enemy vehicles appear behind them. The motorcycles let the convoy pass, then attack from behind, forcing the lead truck to crash. Of the two remaining, one hits the banana pie trap. Bronco triggers at just the right moment, plunging into the hidden pit. The last vehicle is overwhelmed by Bronco and the motorcycle riders together, and the pursuit finally ends. At the safe house, the team digs in, weapons loaded, entrances covered, a drone watching the roads. Salazar's men arrive in force. 2 vehicles hit spike strips and are abandoned. 2 more trigger mines from Baker, destroying one while the other pushes through. Now under fire from both sides, the team trades shots with the attackers as bullets tear through the house. Baker starts prepping the final escape, planting explosives and opening the tunnel entrance. As the team files in, Gucci reaches the ravine first to rig the zipline, but someone has to stay behind to trigger the charges. Baker volunteers. Bronco refuses to leave him, but Baker insists there's no other option. Someone needs to hold the attackers off long enough for the rest to get clear. After a tense argument, Bronco relents and heads into the tunnel with Sid and Rachel, leaving Baker alone in the house. He pops a smoke grenade and starts hunting the attackers room by room, ignoring Bronco's repeated calls over the radio to abandon the fight and run. Once enough of Salazar's men are inside, Baker detonates the explosives, leveling the house and taking most of the attackers with him. He dies in the blast. Meanwhile, Rachel, Bronco, and Sid are still making their way through the tunnel as surviving attackers chase them to the ravine, opening fire as the group crosses the zip line. Bronco and Sid return fire to keep them pinned until everyone's across unhurt, then reach the hidden ATVs and race for the dock, where the rest of the team is prepping a boat. Escape is almost within reach when Olsen's helicopter appears overhead. He opens fire on the fleeing ATV, bullets kicking up dirt around them as Sid pushes the vehicle harder. Bronco fires back, but neither side lands a clean hit until Olsen switches to explosive rounds, forcing Sid to duck into a nearby building for cover. As Olsen circles back for another pass, Bronco and Sid ready a rocket launcher, waiting for him to cross an opening in the structure. When he does, they fire as the rocket takes down the helicopter, which crashes near the shore and kills Olsen. With the security chief gone, Rachel reaches the dock, boards the boat with the surviving team members, and finally gets off the island. Bronco and Sid stay behind. They've still got unfinished business. Disguised as paramedics, the two approach Salazar's residence, the uniforms letting them get close without raising alarms. Once inside, they quietly take down a guard and push deeper into the building. Salazar realizes too late that they're there. Bronco gets close enough to sedate him, and they wheel him out on a stretcher, looking to anyone watching like paramedics transporting a patient. Loaded into an ambulance, he's smuggled out of the city, his unconscious body wrapped and strapped to an ATV, taken through the same storm drains they'd tested earlier to avoid the roads and Salazar's remaining men. A ship is waiting near the coast to take him aboard. Sometime later, authorities in Miami open a shipping container to find an unexpected delivery. Salazar, the billionaire who spent years shielding himself with money, influence, and hidden companies, handed directly to law enforcement. Around the same time, Rachel visits Bobby again. As far as Bobby knows, Salazar has simply vanished. Rachel doesn't correct her, only confirming that she's finally been paid. Then she delivers a warning. She believes Bobby tried to shortchange her by withholding assets and manipulating the settlement after Salazar had already agreed to pay. Now that he's in custody, that decision could come back to bite them. Salazar knows too much about Goldstein's operations, and once investigators start questioning him, he's likely to cooperate to save himself, potentially exposing Goldstein's role in financing his criminal network. Someone will have to take the fall, and Rachel is certain it'll be Bobby. She leaves after delivering the warning. Soon after, Goldstein gets a phone call. The core premise of In the Gray is genuinely fun. $1 billion debt at the center of the plot, a powerful man with zero intention of paying it, and a team operating somewhere between legal muscle, corporate espionage, and outright tactical force. Instead of a typical heist where everyone's scheming to steal money, the film flips the formula as the money's already owed, and the job is figuring out how to get it back. That's a solid hook on paper. What makes it more interesting is that the team doesn't just kick down doors and start shooting. A large chunk of the movie is devoted to preparation, studying the opposition, running through scenarios, mapping escape routes, using surveillance, manipulating situations, staying several steps ahead. It plays like a chess match where half the pieces are lawyers and the other half are carrying automatic weapons, and honestly, I like that more than expected. There's something satisfying about watching capable people actually prepare properly. Most action movies skip right past that. Usually it's here's the plan, and 10 minutes later everything's exploding. Here, the planning itself is part of the appeal, which is exactly where things start to work against the movie too. The problem is that In the Grey falls in love with its own planning a little too much. Several times, the film explains a scheme, shows the team rehearsing it, and then shows them executing it. By the third pass, some of the fun has drained out. Instead of wondering how they'll pull it off, you catch yourself thinking, right, this is the part they walked us through 20 minutes ago. That's where the strategy undercuts the suspense. A clever plan is usually thrilling either because you don't know the whole thing yet, or because it goes sideways and the characters have to improvise on the fly. This movie gives you so much information up front that a lot of the surprise evaporates. It clearly wants you to admire the construction of the plan, but there were moments I wished it had simply trusted the audience to discover things as they happened. The film is also very conscious of its own cleverness. You can feel it in how the characters discuss the operation, in the financial maneuvering, the legal pressure, the surveillance. All these moving parts meant to eventually click together. Sometimes they do. Other times it feels like the movie is pointing at the puzzle before you've had a chance to work on it yourself, which is frustrating because the premise really doesn't need to be this convoluted. Strip away the layers and it's a simple story. Someone owes a massive debt. A skilled crew gets hired to recover it. The target is dangerous. Things escalate, and eventually all the careful planning has to survive contact with reality. That simplicity isn't inherently a flaw, though the debt collection angle alone gives the movie plenty of personality. It's essentially a heist film where the thieves believe they're just taking back what's rightfully theirs, which creates a neat wrinkle. The characters can see themselves as legitimate professionals even as their methods grow increasingly questionable. That legal versus illegal gray zone is where the title earns its keep. Lawyers, corporations, banks, covert operatives, powerful businessmen, and government influence all bleed into each other's territory. Nobody's clean. The film keeps toying with the idea that respectable institutions and criminal tactics start to look awfully similar once enough money's on the table. I just wish it had pushed that idea harder. There's a genuinely interesting angle buried here about power, money, legality, and who gets to decide what's acceptable once the numbers get big enough. But the movie mostly treats those ideas as plot fuel rather than something worth digging into. It gestures at moral complexity, then hurries back to the operation, which is fine if you're watching this purely as an action thriller. The bigger issue is that the script needs danger, and for long stretches, the people running this mission never really feel like they're losing control. They're almost too competent. Surveillance works, plans work, security systems that are supposedly sophisticated get bypassed with surprising ease. The opposition has plenty of manpower but not much credibility. You keep hearing how dangerous the situation is, yet the heroes move through it with the confidence of people who already know they've won. That's a strange trap. Watching experts do their jobs well can absolutely be entertaining. Not every hero needs 2 hours of terrible decisions just to manufacture drama. But there still has to be resistance. There has to be a moment where the plan starts falling apart and you genuinely wonder if these people are as ready as they thought. In the Grey occasionally brushes up against that feeling but never settles into it. The villains rarely seem capable of upending the whole operation. There are obstacles, sure, but nothing that truly destabilizes things. And because the movie spends so much time showing us how prepared the team is, every successful move starts to feel less like a surprise and more like a formality. Of course they had a backup plan. Of course they saw it coming. Of course someone already thought of that. Eventually you start wishing anything would blindside them. A real betrayal. A serious tactical error. A legal maneuver that actually traps them. A twist that forces the operation to change shape midstream, something that makes all that preparation suddenly feel insufficient. There are twists and reversals, but a lot of them are easy to spot coming because the film tends to telegraph its own intentions, handing you enough pieces that you assemble the picture before the characters do. And to be clear, I don't think the movie needed more complexity, it needed more uncertainty. Those aren't the same thing. Some of the legal and financial material also asks for a fair amount of trust. The courtroom decisions, financial maneuvers, surveillance tricks, and institutional responses are all delivered with total confidence. But look closely at the pacing of some of these events and the logic gets a bit wobbly. That's not automatically a deal breaker. This isn't a documentary on international debt recovery, and I'm not fact-checking every legal procedure, but when your characters are constantly framed as strategic geniuses and the script keeps emphasizing precision, the bar goes up. When financial or legal processes start functioning like magic buttons that just push the plot to the next set piece, some of that carefully built credibility slips away. There's also a genre identity issue running through the whole thing. At various points, In the Grey feels like a heist movie, an espionage thriller, a corporate crime drama, a tactical action film, and occasionally a straight-up comedy. That blend keeps things lively. 1 minute it's negotiations, then surveillance, then tactical planning, then extraction logistics. But it also means the film never fully commits to one identity. If you want pure action, you might wonder why so much time goes to logistics discussions. If you want a sharp heist movie, you might wish the plan had more real surprises. If you want espionage, you might want the opposition to feel more dangerous and unpredictable. And if you're interested in the moral undercurrents, the film doesn't linger there long enough to really explore them. So the screenplay ends up living in the same gray zone as its title, enough of several genres to keep the momentum going, but maybe not enough of any single one to feel truly distinctive. Still, the central concept works. Treating a billion-dollar collection job like a military operation is a genuinely entertaining idea. The legal angle gives it flavor, and the planning gives it structure. There's real pleasure in watching a team assemble a complicated solution to what initially looks impossible. I just think the film mistakes preparation for tension more than a few times. The stronger version of this story keeps the same premise and tactical mindset but withholds more information, lets the audience wonder, lets the plan fail in ways that actually sting, and gives the opposition more intelligence. Forces these supposedly flawless professionals to actually improvise. The raw material is all there. The problem is the film explains too many of its best ideas before they get a chance to surprise anyone. You can tell almost immediately this is a Guy Ritchie film. It's in the editing, the attitude, how people talk to each other, the expensive clothes, the confidence, that constant sense everyone in the room thinks they're the smartest person there. Even before the action kicks in, the movie already moves like a Ritchie picture. Quick cuts, slick camera work, clipped dialogue, humor slipped into serious moments. Fans of that style will find plenty to enjoy. The film has real swagger, occasionally too much, but it's undeniably there. Even fairly ordinary scenes get dressed up with enough visual energy and personality that they rarely feel flat. Someone walks into a room, a plan gets laid out, insults fly, and somehow Ritchie makes it feel like a much cooler version of reality unfolding. That's always been part of his appeal. He can make people standing around talking feel like an event. When In the Grey is clicking, that confidence carries it. The dialogue has bite. The characters play off each other well, and Jake Gyllenhaal and Henry Cavill get some genuinely deadpan exchanges that give the film life, while Ursula Corberé brings a calm, controlled delivery that suits the high and fixer vibe. There are stretches where the banter feels effortless. A line lands, someone answers without changing expression, you get a quick reaction, and the movie's already moved on. That rhythm is classic Ritchie, but there's a flip side, and this is where the movie gets more divisive. Sometimes the dialogue stops feeling sharp and starts feeling like it knows it's supposed to be sharp. There's a real difference. You can almost sense the film waiting for you to notice how cool everyone sounds, and when nearly every character operates on that same wavelength, the attitude starts losing its punch. Cool works best when it feels effortless and natural. Here it occasionally tips into smugness, and depending on your tolerance for Ritchie's style, that's either part of the fun or exactly what drives you up the wall. The comedy has a similar issue. Some of it lands beautifully dry, quick interruptions that break the tension without derailing the tone, and Gyllenhaal and Cavill are at their best when the humor stays understated, tossing off a line and barely reacting to sell it. But a few running jokes get stretched too thin once a bit works. The movie keeps returning to it until the original spark fades. The Sid Bronco banter is a good example, as some viewers will read it as genuine chemistry, others as the film leaning on a joke past its expiration date. It's interesting because Ritchie's earlier films often let the humor emerge organically from the characters. Here it sometimes feels like the characters exist to generate the humor. Small distinction, big impact. The voiceover is another very Ritchie touch, and it's arguably where his style helps and hurts the movie in equal measure. He loves explaining how things work to someone is, why they matter, what the plan is, what the backup plan is, what happens if that fails too. At first, the narration gives the film momentum. There's real pleasure in being walked through a complicated operation via fast, punchy exposition while the visuals keep moving. But in the gray leans on it hard heavily enough that I started wondering whether the movie trusted its own images to carry the story, because it clearly can. Whenever the action takes over, the camera gets more expressive and the editing makes spatial relationships and character intentions clear on its own. Then 5 minutes later, someone's narrating another plan at you. That's the frustrating part. The film has the visual chops to show us what's happening but keeps falling back on narration as if it's worried we'll miss how clever it all is. It doesn't sink the movie, but it does make it feel more self-conscious than necessary. There are also stylistic flourishes, on-screen text, graphic overlays, little presentation tricks meant to add personality. Some viewers will enjoy how well that fits Ritchie's visual language. Others might find certain choices a bit dated, evoking the late 90s or early 2000s idea of cinematic cool. That tension basically describes the whole movie. It's like two versions of Guy Ritchie colliding. There's the earlier Ritchie, fast-talking criminals, cheeky attitude, visual tricks, playful structure. And there's the later, blockbuster Ritchie, polished action, international locations, bigger stars, bigger budgets, cleaner production. In the gray sits somewhere between the two, and that's actually one of its more interesting qualities, because despite all the familiar fingerprints, the setup itself doesn't feel like a typical Ritchie crime picture. This isn't a bunch of chaotic small-time crooks tripping over each other's plans. These are supposed to be elite, organized, extremely well-equipped professionals who move like they've done this 50 times before. At points, it feels closer to an espionage thriller or a tactical mission film than the British crime comedies people usually associate with Ritchie. There's a bit of heist movie, a bit of spy cinema, a bit of corporate thriller, a lot of tactical action, and comedy woven around the edges, a mix that makes the film feel slightly unusual even while the filmmaking itself feels intensely familiar. One comparison floating around places it somewhere between James Bond, Ocean's 11, and a Guy Ritchie action film, and I get why it has the polished, international sheen of espionage cinema, the team mechanics of a heist. And then, the moment anyone starts talking, shooting, or blowing something up, Ritchie's personality takes right over. The downside is that the film never fully commits to being any one of those things. It's not clever enough to be a top-tier con movie, not dangerous enough to be a truly tense espionage thriller, and it never quite unleashes itself as a full-blown action spectacle either. The comedy, depending on the scene, feels either sharp or oddly restrained. So what genre is in the gray, exactly? Honestly, a little of everything and not fully any of it. That's not entirely a criticism, though. There's an easy watchability that comes from constantly shifting gears. When negotiations start dragging, the film pivots to planning. When the planning gets too procedural, someone cracks a joke, eventually the guns come out and everything turns physical. It keeps moving and keeps changing texture, And that variety genuinely helps. Where opinions will split is on whether Ritchie's filmmaking still feels exciting simply because it's so recognizably his. If you're already a fan, plenty of moments here will hit exactly right. The editing has energy, the cast looks great, the dialogue has bite, the action has style, and the whole thing carries itself with total confidence that it's cool. Sometimes that confidence is contagious and you just go along with it. Other times I caught myself thinking, I've seen this move before, heard this rhythm before, I know exactly what this joke and this editing trick are going for. That's where the Ritchie on autopilot complaint starts to make sense. Not because the direction is bad, it clearly isn't. The technical command is obvious, but because the real question becomes whether that command is enough when the style itself feels so well worn. One read is that Ritchie's simply repeating himself, another is that he's deliberately dialing things back. Parts of In the Grey feel more controlled than his most chaotic work. The camera isn't constantly screaming for attention, the action stays grounded, the humor leans dry rather than outrageous, and the overall tone is more restrained than you'd expect from this premise. Someone could call that maturity, someone else could call it fatigue. That tension defines the whole film. The exact same creative choice can look disciplined from one angle and underpowered from another. Even the international setting fuels that debate. Some viewers enjoy Ritchie bringing his usual voice into this bigger world of corporate power and covert operations, giving the film a slick, jet-set quality. Others feel his sensibility works better rooted in the British criminal underworld that defined his earlier films. Remove that setting, and some of the humor, rhythm, and character types start to feel less organic. The movie doesn't hand you a definitive answer either way. What it does prove is that Ritchie's style is recognizable within seconds. And that's not nothing. Plenty of directors could take this exact premise and produce something forgettable. In the Grey never feels anonymous, even when it's predictable, even when the narration over-explains, even when a joke overstays its welcome. Even when the characters are trying so hard to look cool you can practically see the sunglasses drifting toward camera. Somebody clearly made this. There's a personality behind it. The real question is whether that personality still feels fresh. For some, this will be classic Ritchie doing exactly what Ritchie does best. For others, it'll feel like a filmmaker reaching for the same toolbox because he knows every tool inside it by heart. I landed somewhere in between. There are definitely scenes that wouldn't survive without the style carrying them. The editing gives ordinary material momentum. The cast understands the rhythm, the dry humor occasionally lands perfectly, and when the action, dialogue, music, and camera all line up, you remember exactly why this formula caught on in the first place. I just wish the movie surprised me with that style more often. In the Grey doesn't really struggle with the Ritchie identity crisis. If anything, it's the opposite problem. It knows exactly whose movie it is, maybe a little too well. The cast is the easiest thing to sell about this film. Put *F*** Ursula Corber Jake Gyllenhaal, Henry Cavill, Rosamund Pike, Fisher Stevens, Chris Hemsworth, and Javier Bardem in the same movie, and yes, I'm interested. That lineup alone raises expectations, not because every actor needs a big dramatic showcase, but because a cast like that should bring personality into every corner of the film. Much of the time, it does. The catch is that the actors often bring more personality to the movie than their characters actually have on the page, a gap that becomes pretty noticeable. Corber is essentially the center of the operation, and it's easy to see why some viewers singled her out. She has the confidence the role demands, carrying herself like someone used to walking into dangerous rooms and remaining the one person still convinced she's steering the conversation. There's a deliberate calm to the performance. She doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room because the character is written to hold power before she even speaks. For a lot of viewers, that works well. She gives the film a sharpness that helps anchor all the planning and exposition, which is no small task given how much of this movie hinges on someone explaining complicated situations without draining the energy. I also appreciate that the film lets her genuinely lead. She isn't standing around while Cavill and Gyllenhaal handle everything. She's the one driving the operation, making calls, negotiating, reading the room, and pointing these men toward their next move. That said, I understand why the casting didn't land for everyone. Some reactions question whether Corber A tilde fully sells the ruthless, nearly untouchable authority the character is supposed to carry, with an argument that the role called for someone who reads older, colder, more naturally intimidating. Rosamund Pike's name comes up a lot in that conversation, given her naturally severe screen presence, and it's easy to imagine wondering how the film would feel with their roles swapped. That's not to say Corber A tilde is bad, it's more that the character is asked to sell a great deal without the script giving her much underneath it. We're told repeatedly that this woman is brilliant, dangerous, and someone people will follow into absurd danger, but we're rarely given the personal material to understand why. That gap becomes even more pronounced with Sid and Bronco. Cavill and Gyllenhaal are exactly the kind of actors you want for this kind of film. They can make standing around in expensive clothes feel like a scene in itself. Gyllenhaal probably gets the most mileage out of what he's handed. There's a looseness to him that helps sell a throwaway look or a dry line as more alive than it probably was on the page. Even when the dialogue isn't doing much, his natural energy keeps you watching. Cavill plays a different register, a controlled, almost immovable A, and the contrast with Gyllenhaal actually gives their scenes some texture. Gyllenhaal bends, Cavill sits there like he's already decided how the conversation ends. Together they're fun, not an all-time action duo, not constantly electric, but fun, and their chemistry does a lot of heavy lifting in this film. It's clear the movie wants Sid and Bronco to feel like men who've worked together for years, and the casual banter, dry jokes, and small irritations mostly sell that comfortable rhythm. Other moments feel like the film is trying a bit too hard to convince you of a shared history. That's the recurring issue with the characters here. A history gets implied far more than it gets felt. We're handed just enough backstory to explain their loyalty to Rachel. She got them out of a bad situation once, so now they'd walk through fire for her. It's functional, but functional isn't the same as emotionally convincing. I wanted a bit more, not a 30-minute flashback or some big trauma monologue, just a scene or two that lets you actually feel the relationship underneath the mission. Without that, these people risk feeling like job titles: the lawyer, the muscle, the other muscle, the corporate boss, the villain, the enforcer, the tech guy. Everyone has a function, not everyone becomes a person. This is where the cast almost works against the film, because these are recognizable, charismatic performers. You naturally expect more from them, and your brain fills in depth the script hasn't necessarily earned. That benefits the movie, but it also exposes the writing. It's hard not to wonder how flat these same scenes would feel with less commanding actors. Pike is a good example of someone who doesn't need much screen time to project authority. She walks in and you instantly understand this person has power, but the role can still feel more like a plot mechanism than a character worth getting attached to. She exists to represent the corporation, push the operation forward, and complicate things later. There's presence, but limited emotional access. Fisher-Stevens brings some genuinely fun moments, and plenty of viewers clearly enjoyed him as a supporting player. Javier Bardem's issue runs the other way. The story needs him to feel like a genuine threat, since the whole operation is supposedly built on how dangerous the situation is, but he doesn't always generate that menace on his own. We're told he has money, power, and dangerous men around him, but intimidation in a film can't rest purely on other characters saying someone is intimidating. Eventually you need to feel it, and I'm not sure the supporting villains get enough room to build that. Chris Hemsworth's character has the physical presence of someone destined to become a major threat, but that setup doesn't necessarily pay off the way you'd expect. That matters because the heroes are so competent. If your protagonists are elite operators who always seem calm, always have a plan, and stay 3 steps ahead, the opposition needs to feel terrifying enough to push back. Otherwise you get efficiency instead of tension. There's a moment where a team member sacrifices himself, and it's probably the clearest example of the film's emotional shortfall. On paper it should hurt. Someone gives his life so the others can escape, and that's usually the moment the cool exterior cracks. But the film hasn't invested enough in that character beforehand, so instead of devastation, you mostly just register that it happened, and the story moves on. It's a shame because you can see exactly what the scene is reaching for. It's not poorly conceived, just emotionally unprepared. You can't manufacture attachment after the fact, and that's part of why the movie can feel strangely weightless even amid gunfire and explosions as the physical stakes are present, but the emotional ones are thin. That's not to say every action movie needs deep character studies. Sometimes a cool team of professionals doing a hard job is plenty, and there are viewers who responded exactly to that grounded, efficient, believable dynamic without needing tragic backstories or sweeping arcs. I understand that argument. There's something refreshing about characters who don't constantly pause to process their feelings. But there's a middle ground. You don't need melodrama, but you do need connection. And in The Grey sometimes mistakes emotional restraint for simply not developing its people. It also affects how likable the team feels overall. The film clearly wants them to read as cool, tailored clothes, calm voices, perfect timing, dry humor, total confidence, and depending on the scene, it works. But occasionally that confidence tips into smugness, and once heroes start seeming too pleased with themselves, you need either vulnerability or real consequences to balance it out, and there isn't always enough of either. One point that stuck with me: the classic Bond-style confidence works because even while a character seems totally composed, the audience senses he understands the danger underneath. That crack is what makes the calm exciting. Here, the characters often seem genuinely unbothered, and if they're not worried, why should I be? That's especially true for Cavill and Gyllenhaal, since both are naturally convincing as people who belong in this world. Part of you wants the script to knock them off balance more and give Gyllenhaal a moment where the jokes stop landing, give Cavill a problem he can't plan or muscle his way through, give Cube a decision where her confidence actually costs someone something. Those are the beats that could have turned a stylish team into people you actually remember. Even so, I wouldn't call the performances a weak point. Far from it. If anything, the cast is probably the biggest reason the film stays as watchable as it does. Cube brings control, Gyllenhaal brings personality, Cavill brings presence, Pike brings authority, and the supporting cast keeps the world feeling populated with people more interesting than the material they're given. That's a solid foundation. But it also feels like the script assumes charisma alone can substitute for characterization, and for 90 minutes or so, it often does, maybe more than you'd expect. It's when the movie finally asks you to care deeply about loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, survival that you notice how little time you've actually spent getting to know these people. That's frustrating, because this cast could clearly have carried something richer. You can glimpse the version of the film where the Sid-Bronco relationship runs deeper, where the history with their leader carries more weight, where the villain genuinely scares them, where there's more friction inside the team. Anything that forces these controlled, composed people to stop performing competence for a minute and actually show something underneath. Instead, the film mostly keeps everyone looking good, sounding sharp, and moving toward the next beat of the operation. Entertaining, sure. Memorable as characters, harder sell. The cast gives you faces worth watching. I just wish the script gave those faces more to actually feel. One of the odder things about In the Grey is that it manages to feel fast and slow at the same time. The editing is quick, scenes move briskly, dialogue comes rapid fire, and information never stops flowing mechanically. Something is always happening, but dramatically. It takes a while to feel like the story has actually begun. The opening throws you straight into a world of operatives, lawyers, money, surveillance, negotiations, and contingency plans, all involving people who apparently already know each other well, and the film doesn't ease you in. It just starts moving and trusts you to catch up. Eventually you do, and once the pieces click into place, the pacing gets much easier to enjoy. The first hour is mostly the team assembling, the problem taking shape, and this increasingly elaborate operation coming together. If you enjoy watching plans get built, there's genuine satisfaction here. But if you came expecting Cavill and Gyllenhaal shooting people every 5 minutes, You might spend a chunk of the first half wondering where the action went, which is where some of the criticism aimed at a film marketed around elite operatives and tactical combat makes sense. In the Grey spends a surprising amount of time discussing what might happen rather than actually letting it happen. The movie can feel like it's accelerating even when it hasn't really moved anywhere emotionally, a strange but important distinction. The edits are fast, the payoff isn't. A scene can be full of rapid cutting, multiple locations, and 3 different threads of exposition, technically generating momentum. While I'm still waiting for the real conflict to kick in, it can feel slow even while it's moving fast, and the film lingers in that zone for a while before the action finally arrives. To its credit, once Ritchie lets the film get physical, it becomes a lot more fun. The gunfights are clear and you can usually tell where everyone is and what they're trying to do, which sounds like a low bar, but plenty of action movies turn every firefight into a blur of shaky cameras and chaotic cuts. Here there's a genuine tactical logic behind the shooting. Characters use cover, split up, communicate, move with purpose. Vehicles aren't there just because a chase looks cool. Cars, ATVs, motorcycles, boats, helicopters, all worked into the actual operation, turning the second half into a sprawling tactical playground. And I genuinely like that the characters mostly behave like professionals rather than making dumb decisions purely to manufacture drama. They prepare, anticipate problems, and know what they're doing. There's a real pleasure in watching competent people be competent. The downside is that competence can absolutely kill suspense if you're not careful, and that's the biggest action problem here. The heroes are so prepared that you rarely feel like they've truly lost control. There's a plan, then another plan, then an escape route, then a backup escape route, then a contingency for the backup. Eventually you're not wondering whether they'll survive, you're just guessing which pre-explained solution is about to get deployed, and that's not the same kind of tension. The film absolutely tries to generate jeopardy. A pursuit, gunfire, explosions, bodies dropping. But activity isn't suspense. You can stack 50 armed men on screen and still generate zero tension if the audience senses those 50 guys never had a real chance. At times, the opposition here feels less like genuine threats and more like targets waiting their turn, which undercuts some otherwise well-crafted action beats. Technically, though, a lot of this is excellent. There are shootouts with real momentum, chase sequences with weight, dynamic camera movement once things go sideways, sound with real punch, explosions that land with actual force, and you can feel the craft underneath the spectacle. I especially appreciated the sequences that clearly rely on real pyrotechnics and practical stunt work. There's something different about an actual explosion, the way debris scatters unpredictably and actors physically react to real chaos in a way CGI can approximate but rarely nails. That contrast, though, makes the digital effects stand out more when they're weaker by comparison. A heavy, messy, physical practical explosion in one shot, followed by something with a slightly cleaner, more artificial look in another. It's not disastrous, but when the practical work is this convincing, your eye starts noticing the difference. Overall, the technical presentation is one of the film's real strengths. The locations do a lot of work. Jet set environments, luxury interiors, sprawling landscapes, expensive vehicles, coastal roads, all giving the film a polished, international look that fits characters operating in a world where money erases normal limits. There's also a nice visual contrast between elegant surroundings and the chaos that eventually tears through them. Beautifully dressed people in a gorgeous location, and then someone opens up with an automatic weapon. Very Ritchie. The cinematography stays fairly restrained during dialogue-heavy scenes but knows exactly when to loosen up once the operation collapses into action, and that shift is effective and you genuinely feel the gears changing. Sound design pulls its weight too. Gunfire has impact, vehicles feel heavy, and explosions sound as dangerous as they look. The score mostly knows to stay out of the way, favoring rhythmic, percussive undercurrents that keep scenes moving without shouting. This is tense at you, a restraint that suits the tactical tone well, doing more quiet work than you probably notice, particularly during the planning and suspense stretches. Which circles back to suspense. Because the film clearly understands how to build the appearance of tension at the music, the editing, characters checking routes, someone possibly being watched, plans shifting, vehicles moving into position. All the pieces are technically in place, and there were moments I genuinely felt nervous. The problem is the script often reveals so much of its own machinery ahead of time that the technical craft is fighting an uphill battle. You can hear the tense score, see the rapid cuts, and still be thinking, they already rehearsed this, which drained some of the air out of the scene. Imagine how much stronger these sequences would land if we didn't already know the full plan A, if we were learning the escape route in real time along with the characters, if something failed without an obvious contingency ready to go, if the villain did something nobody anticipated. That's the version of this movie that could have gone from entertaining to genuinely gripping. Instead, much of the suspense here comes from watching a known plan get executed rather than from real uncertainty. Will they pull off the thing we already know they intend to do? For some viewers, that's plenty. There's a real appeal in watching a complicated plan move from theory into reality, almost like watching an elaborate machine finally switch on after you've seen every one of its parts. I understand the appeal, and when those pieces finally lock together in the back half, the film does hit a satisfying rhythm. The second half is unmistakably livelier than the first, and the rescue and escape sequences give the film urgency it was missing earlier, and suddenly all that talk about routes, vehicles, weapons, and contingencies actually pays off. The movie starts cashing checks it spent the first hour writing. My issue is the balance feels a bit off. We spend so much time preparing for the action that some of it ends up feeling shorter than the setup that preceded it, which is why I understand people arguing the film needed another 20 or 30 minutes. I'd normally never say a fast-moving action thriller needs more runtime, but here, maybe it does, and not more exposition. Definitely not that, but more breathing room. Let us sit with the team a little longer, let the mission develop. Separate the planning from the execution instead of stacking them directly on top of each other, and give the villains time to feel genuinely threatening. Then, when everything goes wrong, it would land as earned rather than scheduled. There are also a couple of expectations the film sets up and never pays off. With Cavill and Gyllenhaal on board and plenty of intimidating henchmen around, you naturally expect someone to eventually drop the guns for a real physical confrontation, and it just doesn't happen. The film is far more interested in shootouts, vehicles, tactical positioning, and large-scale extraction than traditional hand-to-hand combat. Depending on what you want from an action movie, that might not bother you at all. But I understand why some viewers felt like a proper showdown was missing, especially given how much the film seems to tease one. You can't set up the tough guy stare down and never let them throw a punch. There ought to be rules. The third act is where all of this collides. Technically it's the strongest stretch. Aggressive pacing, more action, the planning finally paying off, the practical effects getting room to shine, the film fully becoming the large-scale tactical thriller it's been promising. And yet, if you've already guessed how several pieces will fall into place, it can also feel strangely safe. That split explains why reactions to the ending vary so much, as some viewers find it satisfying because all the preparation finally clicks. Others find it flat because the outcome never feels seriously in doubt. I landed somewhere in between. I enjoyed watching the operation unfold, but I never felt the anxiety the film clearly wanted me to feel. That's probably the best way to sum up In the Gray. In motion, it's technically impressive. A polished camera work, readable action, vehicles and explosions that give it scale, weighty sound design, gorgeous locations, and editing that keeps everything moving at breakneck speed. But underneath all that graft, it's often missing the one thing technical skill alone can't manufacture: uncertainty. I can admire a flawlessly executed escape. I'll care a lot more if, for a few minutes, I genuinely believe it might not work. In the Gray is one of those films where I completely understand both sides of the reaction. Someone walking out saying that was a blast, and someone else leaving the same screening wondering how a movie with this cast, this director, and this much polish ended up feeling so disposable. It lives somewhere in the middle, which oddly makes the title more fitting than anything else in the film. Going in, I expected something fairly lightweight, especially given how little buzz surrounded its release. For a Guy Ritchie film starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Henry Cavill, Ursula Corber and Rosamund Pike, you'd expect a lot more noise. Instead it almost snuck in quietly. A few posters, a little promotion, and suddenly it was just there. That lack of hype probably lowered expectations for some viewers, and honestly, that may have worked in the film's favor. Go in expecting a reinvention of the action thriller genre, and you'll likely be let down. This isn't that movie. It's not trying to overhaul anything. There's no jaw-dropping twist that reframes everything you've watched. It's not especially deep or subtle, and I doubt anyone will spend weeks dissecting its meaning. But if your expectations are simpler: attractive movie stars, expensive locations, tactical action, dry humor, an elaborate plan, and Guy Ritchie making it all look cooler than it has any right to, there's a decent chance you'll have a good time. Sometimes that's genuinely enough. That's probably why the reaction to this film has been so split. A lot of its weaknesses are things certain viewers simply won't care about. The story's familiar? Fine. The characters aren't especially deep? Okay. The heroes might be too competent. The villains could be scary? Sure. Definitely. But if you're already enjoying Cavill and Gyllenhaal bouncing off each other while the operation keeps moving, you're probably not sitting there tallying complaints. You're just watching the movie. And there are real stretches wherein the gray's easy to sit through. The slick momentum makes 40 minutes disappear without you noticing. The locations are gorgeous, the cast looks like they belong in this ridiculous world, and the action brings enough physicality to wake things up whenever the dialogue gets heavy. There's always another piece of the plan being introduced, another element being moved into place, another escape route being rehearsed. It's busy, maybe too busy, but rarely lifeless. That matters, because some of the criticism aimed at this film makes it sound like there's nothing to enjoy at all. And that doesn't match what's actually on screen. Even a lot of the negative reactions acknowledge the same strengths. It looks good, the technical work is strong, the actors have presence, some of the action genuinely entertains, and some of the humor lands. So even people who dislike it generally aren't calling it incompetent, they're calling it disappointing. And those are very different critiques. The disappointment mostly stems from potential. Look at the ingredients: Guy Ritchie, Jake Gyllenhaal, Henry Cavill, Ursula Corber Rosamund Pike, $1 billion international recovery operation, espionage, explosions, lawyers acting like tactical commanders. Hear all that, and your imagination starts building a much more exciting movie before the actual film even starts, which is risky, because once expectations climb that high, mere competence starts feeling like a missed opportunity. I think that's exactly what happens here. If this same film had come from an unknown director with a less recognizable cast, people might be more forgiving. But when Ritchie is directing this ensemble, you expect real personality, something a bit strange, dangerous, maybe messy but memorable. Instead, it's polished to the point where some of that personality gets sanded down. It works, it does the job, it completes the mission, and then you're left wondering whether completing the mission was actually enough. For a lot of people, it clearly was. Some reactions call this one of Ritchie's most entertaining films in years, loving the pace, the action, the cast, the familiar attitude, with a few viewers even naming it among their favorites of the year and wanting an immediate rewatch. I understand that enthusiasm when the film clicks. It's effortless entertainment. You don't have to work at it, and you can just sit back and let the machinery run. And there's something nice about that. Not every movie needs to rearrange your brain. Sometimes 2 hours of stylish nonsense, where professionals pull off absurd plans while looking effortlessly relaxed, is exactly what you want. Nothing wrong with that, but there's also a substantial group saying, essentially, sure, but Guy Ritchie used to make this kind of thing feel special, and that criticism lands harder because In the Grey keeps reminding you of other films without fully becoming a movie you'll remember on its own terms. There are traces of heist cinema, spy movies, Ritchie's older crime work, and his bigger modern action pictures, but it never quite finds the one element that belongs entirely to itself. The debt collection premise comes closest. That's a genuinely fun spin, and I wish the rest of the film matched its distinctiveness. Once everything gets moving, a lot of it settles into familiar territory. The ultra-capable team, the wealthy villain, the elaborate plan, the double crosses, the escape, the endless disposable henchmen. You've seen variations of these pieces before, and familiarity isn't inherently bad. Execution matters, but when you're working with familiar ingredients, you need exceptional character work, exceptional suspense, or a personality strong enough to make the formula feel new again. In The Grey gets about halfway there on personality. Whether this belongs on the big screen is another split question. Visually, there's a real case for it. The landscapes look great, the vehicle sequences benefit from scale, and the explosions land harder. There's enough technical polish that nothing here feels cheap or built purely for TV. At the same time, I get the streaming movie comments too, not because it looks like one, but because it feels like the kind of film you'd casually put on at home on a Friday night, enjoy for a couple of hours, and move on. There's no real urgency demanding you see it right now. Morally, you'll probably have a decent time whenever you get to it vibe. That might actually be where this film finds its real audience. Easy to watch, packed with famous faces, accessible, simple enough to follow even when it over-explains itself, with action, comedy, and style baked in. It's exactly the kind of movie people stumble on later and go, wait, why did nobody talk about this? Whether that becomes genuine appreciation or just comfortable background viewing depends entirely on how much you connect with the Ritchie formula. Because if you already dislike his style, this isn't the film that's going to convert you. Everything people criticize about his filmmaking is on full display. The self-aware coolness, the constant explaining, the smug characters, the elaborate plotting, the rapid editing, the banter. The obsession with making everyone look 10% cooler than logically makes sense. If that bugs you, In The Grey hands you plenty of ammunition. If you're already on his wavelength, it's a different story and you might forgive a lot. That's likely where the extreme reactions come from. One person watches this and sees Ritchie repeating himself. Another watches the exact same film and says, yes, this is exactly what I came for. Neither reaction is hard to understand. And my own problem was bouncing between them throughout. There were moments I was fully locked into a great exchange between the actors, a slick piece of action, a plan clicking into place, that effortless Ritchie rhythm of editing, music, and camera working together, and I'd think, okay, this is working. Then the film would spend more time explaining something I already understood, or the villains would fail to generate real resistance, or a supposedly emotional beat would land without enough weight behind it, and suddenly I'd notice the machinery again. That's never ideal. The best version of this kind of film makes you forget the formula entirely, and In The Grey sometimes makes the formula very visible. Still, I wouldn't call it a failure. That feels too harsh. There's too much competence here, too much polish, too much charisma, and too many sequences that genuinely work. I also wouldn't rank it near the top of Ritchie's stronger output. It doesn't have enough character, doesn't have enough danger, and for a movie built entirely around complicated strategy, it doesn't surprise you nearly as often as it should. But I had more fun with parts of it than I expected going in, and honestly, that's sometimes the strangest position to be in as a reviewer.